Over the next few videos, I'll be joined by my friend Rory as we discuss all things CB radio, from the illegal AM days through the legal FM era, and cover a whole range of CB related topics. So, if you're into CB radio, sit back, relax and enjoy these video podcasts. So, I'm here with Rory today, whose amateur call sign is G1JAA. But Rory, what was your handle? What was your CB handle?
This CB handle was the Cossack, and
Right.
I got that because in my younger days I drove a Lada car, and they were made in Russia, and I wasn't very imaginative in those days, so I connected the two, and hence I was the Cossack.
Fair enough. So yeah, we've sort of been talking for the past couple of weeks. You emailed me originally, didn't you, saying I've probably got some stories you may find interesting on the CB days, and obviously I missed out on those days, so I'm all for hearing that stuff. And we came up with the idea of sort of doing a multi-part sort of video podcast, pre-recorded but a video podcast type thing, just talking about CB. And obviously it'll be quite a learning curve for me because I missed out on those days. So okay, so I suppose we could probably start with the AM days first, if you wanted to. So
yeah, and I think that's really interesting. So we're talking around about 1978, 1979, and my interest was sparked because, like a lot of people of my age, I'd be in my 20s. We watched a TV program called The Dukes of Hazzard, which had two young lads who used to go around in a Dodge Charger. And part of the allure of it was they had a CB radio, and this was quite a revelation. People could talk on a radio, speak to each other, and to put it into context, here in the UK, you had to be a radio ham, you had to have a ham radio license, and even communication in the UK was expensive. In those days, British Telecom owned the telephone system, and it cost a fortune to make a phone call.
Yeah.
So the idea of free communication was very alluring. Really.
Yeah, and I suppose amateur radio was big at this time, but I suppose amateur radio was the technical side. CB, I suppose, for most was more of a social thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a bit like the social media of the 80s.
Yeah.
So as you say, it was AM in those days, which was doubly illegal because it was illegal to own an AM CB radio. You weren't allowed to import them.
Yeah.
And of course, you weren't allowed to transmit on them because of the Wireless Telegraphy Act.
Yeah.
So so the very early days, as I recall, it was very, very quiet. During the day, you wouldn't hear very many people, and then in the evening, it kind of got more lively with people coming on. But it certainly in my part of the world, which was Tameside and Openshaw, it was kind of really quiet. You'd hear a few people come on in those days.
Yeah. Okay. So sort of two questions for people watching. Why was AM illegal? Was it just because it hadn't been allocated, or was there another reason behind that? And then secondly, I've actually got an AM CB set here.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the Sharp CB 4670. It looks like a little calculator with it's got a separate SWR meter, stuff like that. So yeah, so the first question is why was AM illegal? And the second is, if I plug this in now, would I hear anybody these days on AM?
Well, I can't give you a definitive answer to why AM was illegal. I suspect part of it was because the law said it was illegal, the framing of the legislation and communication at that time. And there were some genuine and legitimate concerns about interference, amplitude modulation. One of the interesting things that I found out later was that a lot of the TVs that are imported into the UK didn't have, I think it's high-pass filters to filter out AM frequencies. American TVs did. So, anybody with an AM CB could cause havoc with a number of electrical equipment, phones, answering machines, TVs. Yeah.
So I suppose it was just mainly because it wasn't allocated. So AM CB, is it used nowadays? Do you know of? I know. Probably for a bit of background, you stepped away from radio for quite a while, didn't you, and focused on your career and stuff. So I suppose, do you know if there's any action on AM these days?
Well, the answer is I don't know, but I suspect. I had a little look round before this interview at the radios that are on sale.
Yeah.
And there are quite a few multi-band radios nowadays that cover AM, FM, FSB, converted 11-meter, 10-meter rigs that are sold really for the 10-meter market, but miraculously can be wide-banded to work on 11 meters. So I suspect that if anybody tuned in, they'd find someone nattering away. Yeah.
Okay. So right. So you'll how did you start in? How did you get into CB? Where did your sort of interest first come from?
Well, I mean, I mentioned the Dukes of Hazzard, and at the time I worked in a shop, and I remember someone having one, and I was just fascinated by this idea of having a radio and you could talk to people. I can't get across what a novelty was, what a novelty it was. And eventually I made some inquiries, and through nefarious means, I acquired a radio not unlike yours, the one you've got there, the AM Sharp one-hander. Mine was the earlier model. It didn't have the signal meter on.
Yeah.
And that was it. I fitted it in my car, and much to the concern of my then fiancée and now my wife, we went on a few adventures, and my interest in radio was born, really.
Yeah. So there was a lot of CB. I got some things out to show you. So there was a lot of CB clubs, eyeball clubs, and things like that out there. So things like, we've got a card there for the South Manchester Breakers Club. We've got Trafford Good Buddies there, the United Breakers Association. We've got Trafford Breakers Social Club, all these cards, and React as well. I don't know if you remember React.
Oh, the Channel 9.
So were you a part of any of these clubs, or did you have any involvement in any of these?
Well, I went to the Tameside Good Buddies a few times. That was in Bedbury, where Quaffers nightclub used to be.
Right.
And there was a pub next to it called the Firkin Inn. And there was a social there. I think it was every Wednesday. And it was run by a guy called Bright Spark. And I went a couple of times. It was interesting. There was lots of people there, and the main conversation that was really it was that people felt like they were a kind of unique group of people. They were kind of very rebellious. They were pushing really against the government at the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite an interesting idea. But they were pretty much rebels, I think.
Right. So obviously, we're still in the illegal days here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
so you said there about the government. So just explain that, because it was nowadays CB is more radio, but then, as I say, it was more of a social thing, and obviously socioeconomics played into that. So what was the whole government sort of attitude towards CB radio?
Well, I think the general government's attitude at the time, as I recall, was one of contempt for a huge amount of the population, as they, went around shutting factories, made miners redundant, and generally tried to reconstitute the United Kingdom. So I think that CB was very much a working class, grassroots, blue collar pushback. Really, people were in a revolutionary mood, and I think one of the outlets for that was CB radio.
Yeah.
And that's why the government was so worried, because groups of disgruntled organised citizens with radio communication, of course, would be a concern at the time. And there was very, you have to remember, there was picket lines, there was violence, there was whopping, there was the miners' strike, played out in the background. So yeah, I think they were fairly worried, the powers that be, and certainly the Thatcher government, who ruled us with an iron hand.
Yeah. So obviously, because the craze just erupted, and a lot of people were put off it when it actually. I mean, we're going to talk about when it went legal in another instalment, but I suppose a lot of people preferred that illegal aspect, and a lot of people wanted it to be illegal, but a lot of them wanted it to stay illegal as well, and sort of thrived off that sort of, like you say, that rebellious attitude and that rebellious nature. And I mean, do you know of anyone that was ever caught for operating a CB?
Yes, I mean, I had to wrap my brains about this question. Yes, I did. I've known at least one person who I can guarantee was caught, and they had their CB radio confiscated.
Right.
And he was a truck driver, and I think what happened, he was pulled over in one of the, truck drivers sometimes pulled over for load checks, check the loads.
Yeah.
And I think they found the CB and they confiscated it.
Right.
Well,
so the police were doing this?
Well, yeah, at the time, the story that was going round, and I used to have a contact with a traffic officer at the time, was that the traffic police were given a briefing on the type of antennas that CBs would use, type of radios, and you know, if there was I don't for a minute think they would go out actually looking for CBs. The police are very busy people, but I imagine if someone was pulled up for another offence, then if a CB was found, they could identify it. So yeah, the police were actively involved. If they identified a CB, certainly the traffic divisions would take it off you. Yeah.
Cool. So of course there was I remember when we spoke the other day, you told me about some shops that there was a lot of shops such as Tandy. They were selling CB stuff, but not the CBs. So what was that all about?
Well, it was quite bizarre, really, because it became, as I say, you know, just to pick up on the other point, Lawrence, I think a lot of people thought they were literally the Dukes of Hazzard, because the programme, for those who don't know it, were two rebellious young men driving around trying to evade the police and kind of putting two fingers up at the law. And I think there was a lot of people who felt like they were the Dukes of Hazzard. But in terms of the bizarre nature of CB, there was a company called Radio Shack, or Tandy as it kind of morphed into, and they basically imported everything they sold in the American stores into the UK. They just sent their inventory, or more of their inventory had opened up in the UK. So you could buy things like SWR meters, antennas, you could buy linear amplifiers, you could buy microphones, you could buy quick release brackets for CBs. The only thing you couldn't buy was a CB.
Yeah. So is this pre 1981? This
is pre 1981. Right. There's lots of shops that sprung up that sold everything but CB radios, and they were doing very well by all accounts. They wouldn't have stocked it if they weren't selling it. So it kind of speaks to how much illegal activity was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I read stories, you know, again in the illegal days, that there was shops down in London. They were selling, you know, 100,000 antennas a week. Obviously, that was to the population of London, but there's people passing through and in and out and stuff. And obviously, a lot of mobile stations, truckers, they were buying. You know, for one shop to sell 100,000 aerials a week is phenomenal, and sort of credit to the sheer scale of the craze. You know, I think it's probably, even by today's standards, it's hard to see a craze like that take off.
Yeah, we were more of an egalitarian society then, so there was more of this kind of, we weren't as divided as a society as we are now. It was a group of people who felt, I think, oppressed, and who were doing their best to kind of, I don't know, be rebellious. The best thing I can say is, and I don't want to be rude to people, but rebellious children. We were being told what to do by Teacher Thatcher. And people were just being rebellious, and that's one way they could be, you know.
Yeah. So I also read things. I know of somebody. He's not with us anymore, but him and some of his friends used to import CBs in component forms from the States, and they used to import them into the Isle of Man and then ferry them over to Blackpool, and that was a sort of a loophole around the law, and they could assemble these kits all day long. And they were obviously flooding the local area with CBs, and they made a fortune doing it, and it's quite ingenious, really, to actually do that.
Yeah, there was lots of ways round things, and there was a lot I hear. I don't know that I wasn't involved in it myself, but I heard there was quite a lot of smuggling from Southern Ireland.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, the radio that you showed that I know was in fact came in through Southern Ireland. I was told that. So yeah.
Interesting stuff. So okay, so AM days, obviously AM signals quite different to FM. So what was the whole situation with regards to skip like back then? Was it busy? What sort of things were you hearing?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, because from memory, sometime during the late 1970s, the sunspot cycle was up, certainly on 11 meters. And a lot of us who we weren't radio amateurs. We were hobbyist CBs who nattered to our friends. We weren't technical people. The height of our technical knowledge was wiring up a 12-volt feed and SWR in the aerial. That was it. And then, some of us during the day would hear Italian voices coming in, speaking in Italian, and that was quite puzzling. And then in the afternoon, you would hear American voices, quite powerful American voices. There was one guy that I heard called Junkyard Dog, who apparently was a trucker in Florida. Right. And of course, later, when I got more knowledge, I realised that what we were seeing was skip cycle and signal skipping. And that really enthused people. But people at first thought the people talking Italian were just winding them up.
Right. Yeah. I suppose there probably was some of that involved, but for the most part, genuine skip and long distance QSOs on AM. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Right. So Rory, I've got a badge here which is lent to me by a friend of mine, Neil, and it says your eyeball in plastic pig. So what was your sort of recollections and memories about eyeballs? Did people meet much? Obviously, we're still talking pre-legalized CB. Did that go on much?
It did, but people were very, very, very cautious. So people would. There was a little bit of paranoia going around because everybody thought that the post office was hiding around the corner with hundreds of customs and excise people. So people, but generally speaking, people spoke in code. So we would talk about towns, the rainy city. Well, you don't need much imagination to work out that's Manchester. Crossroads, that was Denton. There was a pub called Kisses, which was the Row Cross. The X, I guess, was the Kiss. And the Damp Patch, which was the car park behind Droylsden swimming pool, which bizarrely was next to Droylsden police station, but it was what people are. And yes, but people did meet. I can remember the first time I went to Thameside Good Buddies, and I was talking to a guy, and he was saying, whatever you do, if you've got a radio, don't take it, because that's the greatest place to acquire illegal radios if you have a raid. So people would not take their equipment. And indeed, I had a really dear friend called Stuart. Sadly, he's not with us anymore. And I met him over CB. We were friends for, nearly 25 years. And a little bit longer thinking about it. And for the first 18 months or 2 years, I didn't know where he lived or what his name was. He was just called the Alien. Right. That's it.
So how did you come to suddenly one day meet up? What?
Well, what happened was that CB became legalised in the March of 81, 2781, the famous Circle on Lidl CB radios. Some people moved onto FM and they got what they wanted. They got 27 megahertz legalised CB. For them, the battle had been won and they got what they wanted. And I moved onto it, and slowly but surely, my friend did, and we met. I think, in the late March of 81 for the first time after nearly 2 years of communicating, kind of incognito, surreptitiously.
Yeah, brilliant. So I hope you enjoyed that first look back on the heyday of CB radio. If you have any similar memories or stories, then let's get the discussion going in the comments section below. And be sure to join myself and Rory tomorrow for the next instalment.
That's a pretty good invitation there. I shall look forward to that immensely. So tell me, you haven't worn the Groucho out then with a handle like that? I would have thought you'd have worn him out. Come back.
We've only just started. He says it's negatory. This is only the first part.